This video is sponsored by Run from the Dark. In the not so distant past, I completed a 2,000 point Dark Eldar army. I've always had a soft spot for the Dark Eldar, and I finally got a full army completed. Now, in the Dark Eldar, one of my favorite things are the witches, the witch cults. I really like them. I just finished the novel Lilith Hesperex, Queen of Knives, and it was really good and got me really energized for the witches. But you know what hasn't got me energized for witches? The GW models. They're kind of fine. They got some wonky proportions and they got some funky heads, probably some of the better heads in the Dark Eldar range, but that's really not saying much. They're a little old, they're a little clunky, and for some reason, I don't know why, but each and every single one of them has their own little napkin pinned to their crotch, and it's a really weird modeling choice, but overall, this box does not represent witches the way I think of witches. And I've been holding off all this time because I knew at some point in 10th edition, the Dark Eldar were gonna get a codex, and that codex would probably come with some new models, because if any army needs some new models, it's Dark Eldar. I've been holding off on witches in the hopes of some new models, and I waited a long time because the Dark Eldar Codex was the very last 10th edition codex to come out for 40k, and no new witch models. In fact, we actually lost a bunch of models. There's no more Grotesques and there's no more Court of the Archon, so my 2,000 point army is not quite 2,000 points anymore. I could keep waiting around and seeing what 11th edition brings, but you know what? The wait is over. I need some witches in my army, and I'm gonna build some witches for my army. I'm gonna use a little bit of this, I'm gonna use a little bit of some other kits, and I'm gonna build the witches the way I wanna see them. I found another kit that is almost perfect proxies, and that is the Daughters of Cain Witch Elves. I put these together over the course of a few weekends, minus the heads. These will get me some more extreme and acrobatic poses. Now to finish these off, I can use bits from the actual witch kit. I also want to use a few of the actual witch bodies to get some legs with the classic overlapping Eldar armor, and I nipped off 4 legs. 1 for the Hecatrix, the leader of my witch squad, and 3 for goons who are carrying the gladiatorial weapons. I glued one body down and then picked out this net weapon, and this is one of my favorites, but the arms are too big, way too big. I used my hobby knife to hack away the bulging muscles to make the arm look more slender, matching the arms from the Age of Sigmar witch elves. I cleaned up my knife work, running some plastic glue over the arm to soften and smooth it out. And speaking of those witch elves, for the other arm, I glued on one of these Sigmar arms. I stuck some green stuff to get me a better anchor point, and then I stuck on a knife arm. Mixing and matching the 2 kits will help the squad look more uniform. Now onto the head, and another problem with these old witches are the heads are way too long. They stick out absurdly far from the neck hole. I used my hobby knife to nip down all the tubes and gubbins from the neck, and then I sanded it smooth. Then I clipped it shorter to make the neck look much more slender and shorter to try and fix the wonky proportions. One classic witch done, now for one of my Kitbash gals. This jumping pose looks like it'll work well with these pokey slashy arms. I nipped off the original arms, cleaning them up a little with my hobby knife, and then glued on the 40k arms, which feel really appropriate. Some real-life gladiators wore armor just over their arms, so it helps these gladiators of Kamara actually look like their namesake. Now for the head, and this is where things get tricky. The actual witch elf heads look the part, but are very obviously not the 40k witches. Too much hair, too much crown. I messed around with sanding, but I think I just need to give up and use the 40k heads. I cut off the neck of the witch heads and then stuck it on, and it's not too bad. It's about the right size, and although it took a bit of fine carving to get rid of the neck and collar, she's looking pretty good alongside her more typical sister. Now, I've used 2 kits to build my witches, and I have a third. But first, have you been looking for a truly horrifying TTRPG experience for this spooky season? Then let me introduce you to Run from the Dark. Run from the Dark is a standalone, one-of-a-kind folk horror tabletop role-playing game that features unique lore, settings, characters, classes, and over 40 different kinds of monsters. The rules are well fleshed out so you can get playing right away, not having to worry about the bloat that comes with trying to determine your narrative like in other TTRPGs. Adventure into the darkness, forging your way through a bleak world with various towns and landscapes, all while fighting horrors along the way as the walkers wielding the light. This TTRPG really caught my eye with its awesome artwork. Honestly, it's good as both a game and a collection of spooky photos. I was sold when I saw a picture of monstrous wolves with no eyes. So go check out Run from the Dark on Kickstarter by following the link in the description below. The project launched yesterday, and if you get in on the Kickstarter, you get access to a version of the book with world map book sleeve, custom plushies, and more. You don't want to miss out on this deal while it's available, so check out Run from the Dark's Kickstarter and pledge today. Another model I have kicking around in my bits bin is this Proxy Succubus Resin Mini. I think this would make a good Hecatrix for the squad. She's not wearing much, but in the lore, this represents the vanity of the Dark Eldar, showing off that they've never been wounded. Although if they ever did get a scratch, they would just pay the homunculus to get rid of it anyway. I glued the legs together, and for the torso, I want to have the witch armor on. I took a plastic torso and started hacking away the front, leaving the shoulder and backpack. This was tricky, but I went slow and used my Dremel to carve away everything I could. Then I lined it up with my finger, and it turns out I need to take off a lot more, and a fair amount of resin from the Proxy Mini. Eventually, I got it to a place where it was gluable, and I filled in the gaps with some extra thick super glue. I went and found some arms from the witch kit. As the Hecatrix, she gets to carry the power husk blade. Then I took some green stuff and filled in the mess I made with the neck hole and stuck her head on. Then for the other arm, I found this knife arm from the Witch Elves kit, so she has a little something from all the kits I'm using. For one witch, I decided to Frankenstein a witch elf body onto some Dark Eldar legs. I snipped her in half and then ground out the witch legs with my Dremel and sanded her tummy until I could get it to fit. Then I nipped off the elf whip and replaced it with one of the gladiator weapons from the 40k box, cutting it off with the glove and plastic gluing it down. Then for the face, I carved the neck smooth and then grabbed another Drukhari head and nipped and scraped and sanded the head smooth so I could glue it down. One more complete witch. I put together another standard witch. The nice thing about the body separate from the legs is I can make poses that I don't get out of the witch elves. I made this one dropping down and swinging one of the blade hooks. And then for the other arm, I really like this knife held backwards, but look how way too meaty this arm is. The muscles are bigger than the normal armored arms. I carved and sanded down the muscles so it matches the rest of my squad, making it much more slender, and then glued it on, finishing it off with another cut down head. And I finally have a full squad of 10 witches that look the way I want them to look. And I have plenty of fodder for my next squad. I poured them into a baggie and I'm ready to go. This is what I was looking for out of some Dark Eldar witches. And I got really lucky that the Daughters of Cain witch elves are basically the exact same thing to the 40k witches. And the parts, not quite interchangeable, but at least the same size. So I am very happy with the unique poses I was able to get out of these parts. The way I have them now is about 50-50 Dark Eldar witch and Daughters of Cain witch, but I do like how they look compared to the GW originals, because the Games Workshop originals, they kind of just feel like goons. Like these guys look like cyberpunks, especially with the Games Workshop paint job, and that's not quite what the Eldar witches are. They're a very important part of the controlled chaos that is the Dark Eldar. All Drukhari suffer from the Soul Leech. Their soul is slowly being pulled away towards Slaanesh, and so they have to make sure that they never ever die. Now every single Drukhari is out only for themselves, but their weird organization, their weird civilization actually keeps everything turning over reasonably well. The Kabalite Cabals extend the power and influence of the Drukhari while bringing slaves back to Kamara. The Homunculus Covens are a very literal life insurance policy where Dark Eldar will pay a homunculus so that on the off chance if they die, the homunculus can bring them back to life before their soul is taken by Slaanesh. And the witches are in charge of feeding the Dark Eldar. Their gladiatorial combats can satiate the soul thirst of an entire arena of Dark Eldar at a time. This creates a very symbiotic relationship between the Drukhari, and I'm not sure how aware of it they are of this relationship, because it could be the natural evolution of their society, or it could just all be the machinations of the current leader as Drubael Vect. I really like the lore of the Drukhari and how it gives a really good reason for all of the different types of Dark Eldar and their weird eccentricities. Forever now, I've had Lilith Hesperax, the Queen of Knives, but I haven't had any witches for her to run with, so it's time to fix that. For the bases, I have some of my custom resin cast infantry bases. I just gotta clean them up a little bit. I sanded down the bottom so they're nice and smooth, and then stuck down some sticker magnets. These help me transport my spindly fragile Eldar minis on some metal movement trays. And speaking of fragile, the witch's tiny feet barely touch the base, so some serious pinning is in order. I took my sewing straight pins and inserted these as far as I could up into their legs, and then drilled a hole through the resin base and then stuck them down with a generous amount of glue. I really don't want these to break down the line. Now the trick with pinning is to drill into something solid. On this foot, if I drilled straight up, it would just end up with an extra fragile ankle. So instead I'm going to attack it from an angle, so I can drill far up into her leg. Then to get this into the base, I drilled a little hole on the same angle and stuck her down. For the Daughters of Cain feet, these are all jumping off some tactical rocks that is a much better solid brick to glue down, but I do need to blend them in. I glued down the stumps onto the bases and then sprinkled on some slate chips. I poured some piles and then used a clean brush to sculpt these piles all around the stumps. Then I wiped it off the flat spots and then dripped on some ultra thin super glue. This seeps in between the grains of sand and turns them into super hard resin-like material. The bases will probably break before the glue snaps. For the resin Hecatrix, the resin is a lot more fragile than plastic, so I put pins for both of her legs and then slid these into matching holes in the base. And I did the same for the plastic witch that has both feet planted, angling her so that she's at the front end of the base and her big net can hang over the back half. To spice these bases up a little, I glued down some more skulls from the Citadel Skulls box and poured on some more sand and glue. These are literally the same bases I've been using for my Cabalites and Racks, so anything I can do to make them unique will help out my army. Now I finally have a full squad of witches. Ooh, I've got some very unique witches, and I have taken a tactical risk. My custom bases are 28.5 millimeters, but witches are meant to be on 25s. But are they? Because the Eldar, they got their range refresh, and now they all are on 28.5 millimeter bases. So I'm thinking this is a little bit of future proofing with the bigger bases. I'm pretty sure I will one day be proven right. However, Racks this edition got reboxed, and the reboxing, they still come with 25 millimeter bases. So maybe Games Workshop forever and ever will keep Dark Eldar on 25s, but I bet they get bumped up. But for now, they're slightly incorrect. Don't tell anybody. These gals might be tricky to paint with about equal parts skin and armor. To try and make it easier on myself, I think I'll work on the skin first. I hit them all with a black prime and then sprayed them with a purple mixed with a little bit of saturated red beige. And as long as I'm working on just the skin, I scooted my airbrush really close to the figures and tried to only spray on the skin parts. I oversprayed a decent amount, but I might as well try. Once all the skin was purplized, I switched to a desaturated tan and sprayed this from above, doing a zenithal on all the skin. Skin is a really tricky thing to paint and have it look right, so I really want this airbrush to just work. I went slow and sniped out all the raised parts of their skin. Now I could keep going with maybe a wash and some highlights, but I want to hold off and hit the armor. Maybe that skin will look just fine on the finished minis. I'm going to be using the colors from my Lilith, black and green for the armor and cloth. I started out base coating the cloth with some black paint, being extremely careful around the exposed skin. Once the black was on there, I painted the armor with a dark green. These models are tiny and their details are very precise, but working slowly, I managed to get all the paint on there where it needed to be and not spilling it onto the skin. Now that the base coats are on there, I started highlighting, taking a dark gray and then painting over the raised parts of the black, covering about 50%. Then I mixed up a lighter gray and painted this over the same spots, covering about 35%. Then I did another still brighter highlight, just doing a little bit for the brightest spots, the light reflecting off of the black clothing. Then some tiny edge highlights of white paint. I did some non-metallic metal on the knife, but I don't know if I want to commit to doing non-metallic metal for every single one of my witch weapons. But you know what, I always paint non-metallic metal. That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is full of hobby goodies, and we now have Army Painter paints. We got speed paint, fanatic, bundles, and we also have my favorite Vallejo texture pastes. If you're looking for paint, we got it, along with all sorts of other hobby goodies, and terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit for any of our past sets or this month's new terrain. Come celebrate Orktober with us and head on down to the Orc Rodeo. A whimsical assortment of high-octane hijinks, this set includes a series of walls and barricades that not only create a coliseum of chaos, but also fits in with our previous Orky wall terrains. Then there are the Goblin game carts, a series of mobile orc entertainments pulled along by an orcified food truck, literally dripping with some good orc grub. Rounding out this set are the three amigos, some brave goblins riding their violently bucking steeds. All this terrain was designed by us and is available at EonsOfBattle.com. Now that the black is done, I switched to the green, doing the exact same thing, working up in brighter and brighter layers of green mixed with yellow-white until I was just doing edge highlights on each little segment of armor. Given this armor, the intense edge highlighting really makes the gals look like Dark Eldar. Next up, I worked on the Hecatrix, painting all of her straps with green and all of the clothing with black. While I was working through all the black and green on all the witches, I tried to switch up which parts were black and which parts were green, so even though they're all the same colors, there's still some variety in my squad. Ooh, my little witches are coming along. I'm really glad I waited on working on that skin until after the armor and the cloth, because now that I see it all together, I really like the simple airbrush skin. I think it really pops with the heavy, dark contrast of the armor and clothing, and then the bright, saturated tones on their skin. I think it works really nice, and luckily it was much easier to paint it that way. I was really worried that the witches were gonna be a giant pain in the butt to paint. It's definitely taken some time, but it hasn't been bad at all. They don't wear that much armor, and so it's not that big a deal to spend some serious time perfecting all of that armor. And now there's just a couple of things left. I'm gonna be introducing another color, because so far I've kept the palette very limited, which is usually my go-to on models that are a little bit busier. They have a lot of skin, they have a lot of weapons, they actually do have a lot of pouches and things, but I just haven't painted those, and I think they look better for it. I wanna hit that hair, but first I should take care of these weapons. I want to keep it simple. I dry brush the weapons with some gray paint to catch on all the dangerous edges, and then I switch to some bright silver paint. I rub this on, focusing on the high points and edges of each weapon, and I let the paint be a little extra wet so I got some streaks and scratches, like these weapons are really well used and abused. Now that the weapons are done, it's time for that hair, and there's only one color that makes sense, red, to match Lilith and her coven, the Cult of Strife. I base coated all the hair, needing once again to use surgical precision to keep the paint from spilling onto their faces, and a couple of ears did end up red, but eventually I got it down on all of them. For the Hecatrix, she has the most hair because she's the most important. And I also left her armor unpainted. I want to make this red as well to help her stand out. Once my dark red base coats were on there, I went over the top of her hair with some bright red. This took a few coats to build up pure red, but I did the same on her armor, not highlighting it to as bright as the hair to make the hair stand out. Once the hair was all base coated, I used a little bit of red wash on the hair to bring back some of the sculpted texture. Then I mixed a little bit of yellow and white into my red to make a highlight, and I took a sharp brush and painted some tiny lines running over the top of their heads to make the hair look more realistic and shiny. I used a dark gray paint to pick out all the poisoned hairpins they have, and then it was time for the eyes. Each witch got 2 tiny dots of black, and then inside of those 2, even tinier drops of white. I managed to do the eyes some justice, so I decided to go ahead and try to paint on some makeup, putting little beauty scars, tear marks, and cat eyes on every face I could. Now that my gals are all painted, I want to add some special effects, but first, I gave them all a satin varnish. Then I broke out the Blood for the Blood God technical paint, and I started sponging this on all over the weapons. No witch would be caught dead with a clean knife. These witches are getting pretty darn close to the tabletop, and I am really excited to bring them on the tabletop. I haven't been able to bring my Lilith Hesperyx. You can bring her as just an independent character, but it's not a great idea because she's not particularly survivable, so you stick her in a squad of witches, and all of a sudden it becomes like 5 or 10 extra wounds protecting Lilith Hesperyx and letting her actually get into close combat and do her stuff. I'm gonna bring this squad of 10 witches into every single Drukhari list I write, and you take witches in a very specific way. There is another Drukhari unit, the Venom, the little transport, and that has a rule where you can split a squad of 10 into 2 squads of 5. The way a witch squad works is you've got the Hecatrix, and she has a power weapon, and then up to 3 guys in the squad can all have gladiator weapons, which are a little bit better than their regular weapons. So you break the squad in half and you put all of the good guys together with Lilith to make a super awesome combat squad. But then you just got 5 losers hanging out. And they very much are losers, some of the weakest models in the game. 1 wound, toughness 3, 6 up save. But they do have some tricks. They can advance and charge, they're acceptable in close combat, and they actually have grenades now. So this little squad of guys can run up to something, chuck a grenade, and then hope for the best. Honestly, both of these squads are probably gonna die in every single game I bring them in, but they're gonna do some pretty cool stuff before they die. And to put the finishing touches on these doomed warriors, I need to finish up these bases. I love my custom bases. I sculpted them once, and I just keep casting more every time I buy some more Dark Eldar. I started out by dry brushing them with some dark gray paint, and then highlighting all the natural nooks and crannies in the bases, and then I did another round of dry brushing with a brighter gray focusing on the tips of the jagged rock and skulls. Then I did a final dry brushing of white paint, just on the very tips of the rocks to make the brightest spots. This is my basing scheme in grayscale. Now to add some color, I put phthalo green ink into my airbrush and dusted this on, just tinting the dry brushing to get some green gray. I don't know if this landscape I've invented is an alien planet or it is somewhere in Kamara, the home of the Drukhari, but I like it. On all the sandy parts, I took a dark red and thinned it down with a lot of water, and I glazed this onto the sand and pebbles, letting it settle into the recesses. And while it was still very wet, I dripped a little bit of bright red, letting it spread out over the wet paint. Once that was dry, I had some more saturated colors down on the base, and speaking of saturation, the last step is some tufts. I really like these tiny 2mm neon pink alien tufts. I picked each one of these up using a tweezers, dipped them into a little drop of thick super glue, and then pressed them down onto the base. I tried to put down about 5 on each base, putting them onto the sandy parts. The nice thing about my custom bases is no base rims. No need to paint the rim of the base black, they're just done. 10 Drukhari witches added to my cabal. One of the units I knew I would have in my army, but took me the longest amount of time to actually build them. I was really holding out on Games Workshop giving me some new witch models, but now that I've built some of my own, I'm pretty satisfied. I would kind of like some more. If I could snap my fingers and have the kitbashing and converting done on another 2 squads, I would probably start painting them tomorrow, but I'm gonna have to build up the energy if I want some more witches. Or maybe I'll get lucky and with 11th edition Warhammer, Games Workshop will come out with some new Drukhari witches. There's still a very, very slight chance that the 11th edition launch box will be Space Marines versus Drukhari. It's happened before. It probably won't ever happen again. It's probably gonna be orcs, but man, if it's Dark Eldar, that would be pretty sweet. In my Drukhari career, I put together a lot of Kabalite warriors, but then I leaned pretty heavily onto the homunculus side of the army because I really, really like Rax and Grotesques, but Games Workshop took those away from me. Now that I have some witches, I can try out the witch cults part of the army, and there are more witch units than just the witches themselves. There's Reaver jet bikes, which is a unit I like a lot, but then there's also the Hellions, which are witches riding the Green Goblin glider from Spider-Man, and I really like Hellions. I have 5 boxes of Hellions, one of them put together, but I haven't been going hard on the Hellions because when it was indexed Dark Eldar, they really weren't very good, but now that we're in the times of Codex Dark Eldar, the Hellions are very good, and I might have to break them open and get them ready for painting. My Dark Eldar army is one of the most complete collections of Warhammer 40,000 that I currently have, and I've got one more super cool unit to add to that collection. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to check out Run from the Dark live on Kickstarter.